Actually, a few more folks are coming in now, so let me just, I apologize. It looked like there was a pause there, and now there's a few more coming in. So, okay, we're going to get started because it is 2 after 3. So good morning and good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you may be joining us for today's session. My name is Wendy Metzger. I'm the Director of Membership Services at the HRO Today Association. And for those of you who are joining us as a guest of the association, I'd like to take just 3 minutes to provide a quick overview of our resources and programming. This really will take just 3 minutes, so please stay with us as we do a quick review. And I'm just going to advance the slides here. The HRO Today Association is a global network of HR practitioners, service providers, and analysts who work together to advance the profession of human resources. Membership offers value and visibility, including opportunities to connect with colleagues in our global network and engage in professional development across different platforms. One element of that professional development is our live streams, what you're participating in today, which give association members a platform for ongoing learning, as well as an opportunity to share successes and lessons learned. Remember too that sessions are available on demand for association members to access at any time after the live broadcast, including this one. If you're interested in presenting a live stream, simply send your proposed topic to me at wendy.metzger@sharedexpertise.com. And very quickly, I'd like to take a minute to talk about the HRO Today Provider Certification Program, which was launched earlier this year. The program is designed to give providers leverage in a competitive market while ensuring consumers have access to the most reputable vendors. It also creates a set of standards that are consistent across the industry, so providers are being measured by common benchmarks. The ultimate goal of the program is to ensure the safety of customers by making sure they are choosing from only the highest quality providers. And congratulations to these businesses who now have instant credibility with prospective clients and who will be featured in our HR Procurement Center, which is in the final stages of construction. For more information on this program, please visit our website, and of course, association members receive reduced pricing to participate. And our association conference will be a virtual event this year, a half-day retreat with dedicated time to network, as well as sessions that delve into how tech can enable HR and how HR teams can prepare for what's next. There will be a live Q&A with CHROs that will address what the future of work looks like. Participants will be able to connect directly with speakers and get answers to their most pressing questions. Registration is open on the association website, and when 2 participants from one business register, the third can attend for free. And you can register before September 5th to save money as well. And finally, do you know an individual, team, or business that has done notable or even inspirational work in HR this past year? We want to hear these stories so we can recognize the positivity and raise the HR profession via our HRO Today Association Awards program. The awards will be presented virtually during the association conference, which we just talked about. Deadlines are approaching. You can find details and the nomination forms on our website. And now I'd like to introduce our guests. Joe Santana is the chairman of the CDO Power Circle and the creator and host of the ERG Power Talk podcast. Joe is an author, workshop leader, executive coach, and strategic advisor who serves some of the most well-known and respected companies in the world. His most recent book is Supercharge Your ERGs, 18 Tips to Power Up Your ERG/BRG Strategy. For more about Joe, visit him at www.joe@joesantana.com. Brian Vigent and Jimmy Hall are technology company co-founders who launched CultureHQ, a tool that drives workplace inclusion through organic human connections. Go ahead and take it away, Joe.
That's great. Thank you, Wendy. Appreciate that introduction. So almost 10 years ago, a young assistant associate professor at Harvard Graduate School of Education named Hunter Gelbach decided to conduct this experiment that was captured in a paper that was titled Creating Birds of a Similar Feather. And the experiment took place in this suburban high school with the incoming class. And essentially, prior to the start of the new school year, Gelbach and his team called 315 of the incoming freshman class members and 25 of the teachers who would be teaching these students. Both the teachers and the students were given a survey to complete that explored a number of different things, such as their preferences in friends, sports, teams, music, etc. And a few months later, when school opened, Gelbach and his team met with these freshmen and their teachers and shared with them their similarities and what was similar about them. What are some of the things they all enjoyed? At the end of the school year, he and his research team then came back, and what they discovered was that the students who took part in that experiment did dramatically better than the ones who did not in terms of their grades and their academic performance. Even more surprising, the students of color did even a lot better compared to students of color who did not participate in this experiment. And the end result was that they concluded that you can create a birds of a feather effect where people feel like they can connect with each other, which drives inclusion. Now, note that none of these participants went through any unconscious bias training program. It didn't take them years to move the needle and to progress gradually toward inclusive behavior, just a 9-month school year. So the questions we want to consider today are, how can you create your own birds of a similar feather effect among your teams and your company? And can you do that today in an environment that's full of remote workers? The answer is yes. And we're going to talk about how this can be done with a little help from some emerging technologies and with some basic techniques. Now, to help us delve into this a little deeper, I'm now going to bring Brian and Jimmy into our discussion. So Brian, Jimmy, thanks for joining us today.
Of course. Thanks for having us. Glad to be here.
Pleasure, pleasure. So, from our many previous discussions, I know that you guys have built a platform specifically designed to encourage people to discover their commonalities with each other. What inspired you to work on this? Brian, I'm going to start off with you.
Of course. Yeah, gosh, lots of inspiration here. And Hunter Gelbach's study there was certainly part of that story. But for us, Jimmy and I had a really personal story and experience where we met actually at our previous company, Forrester Research, and we formed a friendship through ping pong nonetheless. And him and I really would have never met if it wasn't for ping pong, because we were in 2 different departments that didn't overlap much. I was in sales, he was in data. And I remember when I joined, I was super intimidated to join this big global firm. How the heck am I going to get to know people? And fortunately for me, I met Jimmy pretty early on just through ping pong. And we formed this friendship. And he introduced me to a ton of people. It then ended up turning into this professional success story where we were able to help our 2 teams that we were on collaborate more effectively. So it was really a powerful picture how one interest could do so much for one friendship and my career. And actually, ping pong actually led me to connect with our CEO and form a friendship with him. I formed a close relationship with our chief people officer and many more people, from leaders to employees, just through ping pong. So we were able to really see how one passion or interest could lead to so many benefits, so many connections. And so for us, we wanted to build a company that was rooted in connecting people in meaningful ways to help individuals feel like they belong and to change an organization's culture where inclusion was actually deeply embedded into its DNA. And I would say after we had launched, even more so, when we spent a lot of time talking with minorities, talking with diversity and inclusion leaders, and talking through all the different ways that people have been marginalized and experienced microaggressions, and really just learning about all the challenges that existed across inclusion, that really inspired us to really emphasize building a tool that could scale inclusion efforts and really help everyone feel like they belong and can be their best self. But naturally, the question always is, all right, how do you do that? What does it look like?
Yep.
What's the best approach? And we came across the study like Hunter Gelbach's study that you had referenced. And we also came across Google's somewhat famous Project Aristotle study, which both of those sort of research articles and studies really point to the same thing. By creating a space that is really filled and characterized of psychological safety, people are able to connect personally and form nice relationships. And the last thing I'll just say is that if you think of the best teams that you've ever been on, of course, I think you could think about how close and comfortable you were with your teammates and the close bonds that you had, the feeling of you're all in this together. So for us, that's what really inspired us and what we're certainly deeply passionate about today, helping people to just, at the end of the day, be their authentic selves and have the opportunity to form meaningful connections with with their team, with their manager, and really just with people all across the organization.
That's great. You know, it's interesting how sometimes we'll have a flash of insight or an aha moment from something, you know, that you might consider every day, like playing a simple sport and so forth. But there's a lot of power. There's a lot of power behind that. So Jimmy, I'm gonna shift over to you now. And so, you know, as Brian was talking about this moment of aha, where you realize that this is that there's an opportunity to increase the connection between people when they find that they have something in common, even if that thing that they have in common has nothing to do with the day-to-day job, or even if they don't have a lot of other things that they discover that they're in, you know, they have in common. So now when this happened, and up to this time, there are a lot of platforms out there, you know, that are getting more play now than they ever have before, such as Zoom, Facebook. There are platforms also like Microsoft Teams, Workplace. I mean, you probably can go on, and we could list probably another 10 of those that have been out there. But I noticed that there are organizations out there, like there's another one called Rally Video that created a different type of platform for people to be able to network, so that instead of being one person talking to a number of people like we are, people can form little clusters and talk to each other and so forth. And so my question to you is, what is motivating that? Why did you feel that, well, some of the platforms that are out there, like the WebExes or the Facebooks and so forth, are not enough? You need something else to do this. What is it that you were trying to do that you couldn't do in that other vehicle?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the question that every entrepreneur faces early on: where's the gap in the market? What can you do better? What can you do faster? What can you do with, you know, fewer resources than the next person to cut on costs? And for us, it was this whole idea of the power of meaningful connections among employees, from that personal story you mentioned. And these other platforms that we saw in the marketplace had elements of that. They had elements of this personal interaction, personal anecdotes to a degree, but they were secondary to the main purpose of the platform. So we're seeing things like on Workplace by Facebook that was really helping teams collaborate better, helping people collaborate across the company, helping work get done faster. In Slack, you know, Slack is being used almost everywhere, really focused so deeply on communication. Obviously, it has personal elements to it, but that isn't the purpose of the platform, and it shows to a degree. Because if you dig into Slack and you look at their profiles of each user, you're going to see that it's very sparing of all of the helpful details that could allow people to connect in different ways. So that's what we noticed right away, is that we wanted to build something where the conceptual idea of a profile was front and center. Who are you? How are you similar to me? How are you different from me? And then let's connect. Let's get to know each other. Let's succeed together. And that's the real idea of community. This idea that once I'm able to learn a little bit more about you, I've basically created the foundational level for a relationship to take place. And that's what we were all about. We were all about, I got muted. We were all about how do we create the conditions, Joe, for people to connect and form those relationships? How can CultureHQ help facilitate that type of thing? And it's been really interesting ever since, and especially during this time in COVID. But it all started there with how do we develop those relationships in a better way and really keep them front and center.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So Brian, I'm going to go back to you then with this.
Sure.
And kind of delve a little bit deeper into what Jimmy just talked about. That there are a lot of platforms out there that collect information about people and share some of that information. In fact, when there are platforms inside organizations that collect information about people, skills, experiences, and things like that. But what do you find in your experience? And this is something I've found in my experience, but I would love to hear you articulate it. What have you found in your experience are some of the elements that are really important in helping people to connect together? What are some of the elements that you naturally discover through, let's say, a game of ping pong or some other social event about another person that help you to connect with that person in a way that the general information that organizations collect, like, my title is, and I work for this department, and I have a degree in accounting or whatever, that information doesn't supply? What are some of those deeper things that you find are more important to creating connection that leads to inclusion and relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it sort of piggybacks a little bit on top of what Jimmy was saying, where when you look across all those different types of tools that exist today, and you see what type of information you have on people, it's so limiting and it's incredibly work centered. You have the static org charts like you were mentioning, you have basic employee directories, skill repositories, which get a little bit deeper, a little bit better into who somebody is. And then of course, in the comms tools that people are using every day, like Microsoft Teams and Slack, you really don't have good, deep profile information on people. And there's really no personal view to understand who people are. And of course, for specific use cases, those types of directories or skill repositories can be helpful, but to ultimately build real connections and relationships, I mean, you have to dig deeper and you have to learn more about who people actually are. And I would say if COVID has really taught us anything, it's that it's okay to bring your whole authentic self to the Zoom call with your kids jumping on your lap, you have your cat climbing over everything in the background, you're working out of your bedroom, and it's okay. And at first, I think people were a little bit hesitant to share that type of look into who they were. But as we realize that we're all in this together, that we can share our authentic self and we can be personal. And so you're starting to see the onion being pulled back a little bit. And so that's really powerful. But that type of personal information, in most cases, is really invisible or lost in channels or groups or in one-on-one conversations over Zoom. And unfortunately, a lot of people are very hesitant to share the personal side of who they are in the tools that exist because they're so work-centric and you have your manager in a channel or in a group. It's really not that safe space to get personal. And so for us, that's what we're really helping to do, is to create that intentional space that is empowering people to really showcase their whole selves. Things like your interests, your passions, your talents, your skills even, and really all the unique stories that make up who you are as a person. We want to really curate and create a new picture that is authentic, personal, and just really inherently human, I guess.
Yeah.
So you can really, I mean, for us, not only do we capture like all that information, and I think it's important for people to understand that too, is trying to figure out ways to do that on your own, even without CultureHQ as a tool, but to try to capture that more personal view of who people are. And the most important thing that we've seen through COVID is this concept of storytelling, where it can really bring to life people in a powerful way, where you can start learning the uniqueness about who people are. So from interns to leadership, you'll be able to find so many ways to relate to your colleagues, find all those different commonalities with people you've never met and would meet, and ultimately feel like this is a company that you can belong in.
Yeah, no, that's all great. You know, as I was listening to you, I was thinking back also. So there is a little exercise that I've done in workshops, in a number of workshops. I've done it with CEOs, I've done it with mid-level managers, I've done it with directors and below, so people at all levels. And it's a very simple, and if people are interested in finding out more about the exercise, all they have to do is Google I am from poem. So essentially, and there's a couple of them out there, but what I do in the meeting is I literally have a template where it asks questions that helps the person or guides the person through the process of creating a personal poem about themselves. And I already have one about myself. And basically, I'll talk about, you know, where I'm from, where my parents are from, some of the experiences I had, the things I saw when I was young. And it sort of gives you a synopsis of some little, it's a little peek into various elements that form who I am and my perspectives in the world. And interesting enough, as other people do that, so you have 40 people in the room who may have flown in from different places to this location. As they do this, then you can take a break later on. You do this sort of early on, then you take a break. And all of a sudden, you can hear the buzz in the room. All of a sudden, these 40 strangers feel connected because they all find something they have in common. These two people grew up in a farm. Maybe that's the only thing they have in common, but that connects them. These two people have a particular liking for a particular movies or a particular way of thinking. Or these two people have something in common in terms of the professions that one of their parents had. And you can see it across the entire demographic of whether they're Black, white, Asian, Latino, whatever they are, there's that connection formed around that one element that they found, that you and I, this is where we connect. This is where your dot and my dot. So I know how powerful that is. And certainly, you know, what I did, it's a little bit harder to do it now with COVID-19, you know, over the internet. You could do it, but it's not as powerful as when you do it in the room. You can do it. I have done it actually, but it's not as powerful as in the room. But to have a system that accrues that information certainly is a valuable thing. So I can certainly appreciate that. So Jimmy, back to you again. So organizations have these groups, employee resource groups or business resource groups. They're ubiquitous. 90 to 95% of the companies out there have them, so they know what they are. And for those who don't, these are networks of people that form communities within the organization, whether it's a women's network, a veterans network, or whatever group, whatever demographic group decides to pull together. And a lot of these groups, one of the things that they want to do is drive inclusion. They're looking for different ways. They're trying to drive inclusion specifically of the group that they belong to. They're trying to integrate that group more into the organization, and also to pull more people into the group who may not share their sort of social identity characteristics, but they want to also have those people involved as well. How does an AI platform that does some of the things that you guys have been talking about, how does it help to do that? How does it help people who are members of a group like that to achieve that goal of connecting better with the rest of the organization and pulling other people in?
That's such a great question, Joe. The whole concept of how do you apply this to what people are doing now with ERGs in the workplace. And we've talked to so many ERG and diversity and inclusion leaders. We've done a lot of research on this. And we liken the BRG or the ERG environment to tables in a lunchroom. If you walk by any lunchroom in a school, as the book says, you know, that famous book, people are sitting at the same table who are similar to each other. And you're going to see similar people at similar tables, and you look down the room and this is what you see. And for many companies, that's what ERGs have been like. You know, there's a place for you. There's a table for you. Come work for us. There's a place for you here. And those have been very powerful. There is a subgroup for you where you can connect with people over a difference, a perceived difference that is a big part of your identity. That's a very important thing. The problem is that we've seen with a lot of companies is that they can't connect the tables to each other. And that's been the really challenging thing. And that's something we've been so surprised to find, is that people aren't thinking of inclusion yet in that really progressive way. There's a subgroup for you, but then take a step back and here's the whole organization, real inclusion. And the reason that it continues to kind of go in that direction is people are so focused on people's differences in the workplace. They're focused almost to an exclusive degree on people's differences, to the point where they are not looking at anything about how they're really similar to each other. And when you keep underscoring that, you keep driving home, I'm different from you, and you're different from me, and this is my group, and that's yours. And that's where you're getting into an area of exclusivity, or the feeling of that in some cases. But when you're able to expand someone's identity beyond their ethnicity, beyond their gender, and beyond some of those key characteristics, if you expand it to their interests, their skills, their experiences, that's when you open the door for these connections to happen. That's where you can bridge gaps between the tables, not only between ERGs, but between ERGs and everyone else at the company. And you know, by virtue of ERGs, the majority of people are not part of those groups. So you have to bridge these gaps. And what we're seeing with things like Black Lives Matter, like you mentioned, Joe, is that there are other groups that are getting involved in the tribulations of other groups that they're seeing. So you see that so many other groups are rallying behind Black Lives Matter during this whole summer with the protests. And so when you're able to kind of open the door and connect with people in those personal ways, you're in turn opening the door for people to step in and support each other when there's something that affects a particular group. So you're really bridging the gaps to help people stand by each other. And we saw this not only with ERGs, we saw this, that people were having a hard time connecting across different teams because they didn't know each other. They're trying to collaborate, but they don't have that trust they've established yet, even across different floors in a physical office.
Yeah.
I mean, this is basic human behavior, you know, and you need a tool to lean on to really overcome that. And as Brian said, the research has time and time again shown how important this is. It's important from in sports teams, building that level of trust. It's important in the military. They're even looking at nurses and doctors. When they introduce themselves before surgery, that patient has a higher likelihood of surviving. It's something as basic as the two people talking to each other before the surgery starts. So we're seeing this all across the board in the academic setting, like you said, and it's no surprise that when you come into the workplace, when you're able to expand the identity, make those connections, that there are really untold benefits that happen, you know, when you're able to make deep, meaningful connections by expanding people's identity and allowing people to connect in those ways.
Yeah, no, well said, and very powerful. I mean, it's and there are some organizations that are seeking to do that. You know, I've heard talk a lot about intersectionality, or trying to bring these different groups together, maintaining. You know, there is certainly a benefit of having the distinct groups where they can work on things that are in common to the particular needs of that group. But there's also another benefit in connecting. So it's not good to focus only on difference and exclude the fact that we do have commonalities, just like it's not good to totally focus on what we have in common and not pay attention to the fact that there are some differences that you need both. You need sort of that balance there.
It's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, and you're
It's
absolutely right.
The inclusion coin has both sides.
Yeah, and the pendulum sometimes swings too far one way and sometimes too far the other. So I get your point. Brian, can you add to that in terms of also, I think Jimmy kind of started us along visualizing how those connections can support inclusion and more connection between people. How about you? Do you have a scenario that you can share?
Yeah, I think I always try to think of it. I mean, it's always helpful to think of tangible use cases and things like that. But I think when you look at a majority use case from an employee perspective, and especially you looking through the lens of a minority employee's perspective and their feeling of inclusion today. And so if you just, I guess, sort of think about a visualization of a before and after picture of today, what it looks like, of how a minority feels included or feels like they belong, and then what it looks like after. And so for before, the ability to, in COVID times right now, to form new relationships, to connect with new people, build relationships, when you have so much going on personally, within family and everything like that, but then within work, is how are you going to be able to build those relationships? So if you look at an employee and you look at what you're dealing with every single day on your team, you may have one or two close relationships where you feel comfortable to be vulnerable and share all the challenges that you're going through. And with your manager, I mean, of course, you try to keep your professional hat on so that you can prove your worth, and working hard, of course, to ensure that your voice is heard and valued and recognized. So then if you look at your team, your manager, and then outside of your team, your immediate reaction in these times, and is what Jimmy was mentioning and what you were mentioning, is that you need to try to find a group that you can relate to and connect with. And of course, typically, as a minority, that's typically an ERG that you're looking for, to find people that you can connect with. But in that before picture, that employee really doesn't feel like they belong. They don't feel like they belong really on their team. They don't feel comfortable with their manager in most cases. And they're certainly going to be fighting an uphill battle to move up and connect and build their network throughout their career. But if you look at the after picture of, if this same employee had access to some sort of tool, like we were talking about earlier, that had this new and more expansive and more personal view of who their colleagues were, and be able to showcase their authentic self, that's going to help them feel like they actually belong. Yeah. All of a sudden, if you look on your team, you now are able to learn much more deeply about who your teammates are, and vice versa. It helps me to relate to them as humans, form close relationships with the team. And now, of course, you feel less of an outsider because you have those close relationships with your team. And then with your manager, it changes the the game there, because you don't just see the manager for a person that you're reporting up into, and then you need to constantly prove your worth. You can now build a closer and more personal relationship that builds that trust needed, like the whole Google Project Aristotle study talks about. You can now feel comfortable taking risks, expressing difficulties or challenges, and feeling that type of safety. And the last thing is just so you have your manager, your team, building much more close relationships there and feeling like you belong. But then outside of your team, now all of a sudden, you have all these unlimited and untapped opportunities to connect with people and not have to rely on just the E or G as a way to connect and share and find that tight-knit relationship. You can now discover all these people across departments, find out what commonalities you share with, what passions you have in common, and really it just closes the gap between myself, between yourself, between your peers and leadership. It's all about humanizing the workforce in a powerful way. So you can sort of see that picture of, you just look at your employee and the struggles you can have today, and what would change if you had that sort of expansive view to be able to connect with people.
Yeah, no, great point. And certainly, I mean, we're at the top of the hour, so I'm gonna stop here in terms of questions, but what I will sum up real quick is that, to me, that's the future of DEI, as the title says there, because by enabling us to get past the limitation that we have, where if someone doesn't look like us, or if we don't know enough about them, we may automatically assume that we have nothing in common, and we live inside our heads in our own little self-made silo. These new tools that are coming up, like what you guys are doing and talking about, and these new practices enable us to let the organization connect in a more fulsome way, and recognize where those connection points are. So that's all wonderful stuff, and it's not tomorrow, folks. It's here today, right? So Wendy, any questions for us? I've been looking at the chat. I don't see anything. So just let me know if you have anything on your end.
Nothing has come through the chat. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to submit them. I apologize, I did not mention that at the top of the session. If anybody has anything, you can feel free. And of course, if you don't come up with any of your questions now, you can always submit them by email, or connect on LinkedIn as well with Jimmy, Brian, and Joe to send your questions and continue the conversation. I don't see anything coming through right now.
Okay. Well, then, Wendy, I'm gonna pitch it back to you. But before I do, Brian and Jimmy, thank you. Either of you, where can you guys be reached if people want to know more about you? Is there an email address or just a website you want to shout out?
Our email addresses are simply Brian and Jimmy at culturehq.com. Of course, separate, Brian at CultureHQ, not Brian and Jimmy at culturehq.com. But of course, connect us on LinkedIn, just to be clear there. But yeah, Jimmy and I are super passionate about this and always willing to help and connect and network with people. So feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. We're happy to help in any way.
Fabulous. Thanks for joining me today, guys. Okay, I'm Joe Santana, and I'm pitching it back to you, Wendy.
Thanks, Joe. And we did have something come through on the chat, but that was just somebody saying thank you very much to everybody. So
okay, great.
I was excited for a question there, but no, I do want to say thank you to Joe, Brian, and Jimmy. We do appreciate you sharing your insights with our audience. And thank you to our participants for taking the time to join us today. Please visit our website to view the calendar of upcoming live streams. We do have a members only session coming up next week that is going to be talking about racial injustice and how HR can create change in that space. That'll be a real candid conversation around the issue. So visit the website for details. And don't forget that all live streams are in our on-demand library online, and that's where this one will be as well. And if you're looking to get more involved in the association, presenting a live stream is a great way to do that. So feel free to contact me about that. And thank you again, everybody. We look forward to connecting soon. And thank you again to our presenters.
Take care.
Thank you.